A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm. Thank you. So, hello, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to Baiju's exam prep. And now we continue with the portion of methods of waste management. How is it that the waste is actually managed? And what are the various techniques which are utilized, which are used and in place in order to manage these wastes which are generated? And here we are generally referring to the various different types of municipal waste which is generated. Okay, and we have seen that in the case of the municipal waste, we have the existence of both biodegradable, that is the organic waste, as well as the non-biodegradable waste, that is the inorganic waste in larger quantities. Now, one of the methodologies of waste management is open dumps. Now, open dumps, as simplistic as it appears, it is carried out by simply dumping the waste in a particular region. So these are uncovered sites. Okay, so you would have also encountered that in various different places, there is simply nothing but the dumping of the waste which is carried out. So that is basically the open dump. Okay, now in this, the waste isn't handled and is left out in the open, and it isn't even separated. So this talks about commingled waste. Okay. Now, this is one of the worst methods of handling the waste. One of the worst methods of waste management is the case of open dump. But the problem is, due to the lack of the various different waste logistics involved, we don't have enough handling capacity. We don't have enough segregation areas. We don't have enough recycling areas. So that is why majority of the waste, even in the urban areas, it is not only restricted to the rural sectors anymore. Even in the urban areas, you will find that there are large open dump sites which exist across the various different vicinities of these urban localities and the urban regions. Then we have the case of landfills. What is a landfill? So here, landfill is basically, if suppose there is a land or a land portion like this, now in this, there is a ditch which is dug. Okay, a ditch which is dug. And in that ditch, you dump that waste. And then it is covered with a thin layer of soil. That is what we regard as the landfills. That is what is referred to as landfill. Now, ideally, there should only be the organic waste which should be dumped in these landfills, ideally. Okay, so this should include organic waste only. Should include organic wastes only. But then these organic wastes, basically, that is not the norm which is followed. Generally, even in the case of the landfills, you will find that in larger areas, again, because of our incapacity to handle and segregate various different wastes, our incapacity in order to recycle the various different wastes, there also in the landfills, you have various commingled waste which is actually kept in. So this is where you have the commingled waste not find suitable for waste processing. Post-processing and pre-processing rejects from the waste processing sites, that is those which have already been processed, and there are certain rejects, they should be kept there. Non-hazardous waste which cannot be recycled or which have not been recycled or which have not been processed. Now, here, basically, in the case of the landfills, there, when you have a lot of that waste, much amount of that organic waste, any organic waste, any organic material, when there is a larger decomposition or degradation which happens, that ends up releasing significant amount of gases like methane, and that becomes toxicant for the ecosystem and the environment at large. Okay, so as a result of this, you have adverse pedoclimatic conditions. That is, the adverse pedoclimatic means the micro conditions of the soil which is prevalent. So adverse soil conditions in the landfill, and that ends up creating the problems of gas emission, shallow soil. The soil doesn't take enough depth, and also there is leaching, right? Contaminants, they end up leaching. And in these areas, you will always find that the temperature significantly increases. This contributes to the higher temperature which is observed in majority of the urban areas. What you would also have studied as the creation of a urban heat island. So that also is created because of this. Now, this has got many different problems. Largely, the problem of the toxicants leaking into the various different types of the surrounding soil, and also the chemical waste. Now, there is no particular set norm which is followed, because majority of the cities, they are running out of these landfill sites. Because when we talk about the larger cities and larger areas, now they will be generating that waste on a daily basis. Huge amount of waste is generated on a daily basis. Now, as a result of that, the larger municipalities and the larger metropolitan cities in our country, they are running out of these landfill sites. And they, many of them actually ran out of the landfill sites almost a decade back. You cannot end up excavating a habitation or an agricultural farmland in order to dump the waste. That cannot be done. So what is happening is that rather than covering them with the soil, these areas are turning out to be open dumps, get converted due to large waste generation, waste generation. The landfills are converted into open dumps. Okay, so this is another such issue which all the metropolitan cities of the country are facing. And that is a pervasive issue. Because once you have these landfills which you don't cover it with a top layer of soil, then these become the sources for the spread of diseases as well. In a country and a warmer tropical region such as India, the prevalence and the pervasiveness of diseases such as dengue, chikungunya, malaria, that is quite significant. So if you don't cover it up, that will create its own set of problems. Now, in order to get rid of the issues that are created by the landfills, you have another methodology, that is the creation of sanitary landfills. So as I told you, that majority of these landfills, they get converted into open dumps. Ideally, it would have been a landfill, but then getting converted to open dumps. Okay, so here, as you can see, these become sites for release of gases, become sites for release of gases, and also become centers for spread of diseases. Pranay, these convert into humus. These can be used as manure. Ideally, that is the purpose. That in the landfill, if you fill only the organic waste, that organic waste over a period of time can get converted into manure, or can get degraded and decomposed and can add to a kind of an organic manure. But then the problem which arises is that because you have commingled waste, including plastic waste, including all different types of inorganic waste, so that complete degradation process is inhibited. So rather than having a formation of a manure, you have a kind of a slurry of sorts which is prepared, where the land will have the toxicant ensured for a longer period of time. So that is why it hardly solves the purpose of creating a kind of a region for, or ideally what should be done is, once the waste is segregated into degradable and biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste, only the biodegradable waste should be given into the landfill, so that over a period of time you have the land getting converted into fertile landscape and the biodiversity can emerge over that again. But that is very far from what is achieved. Now, in order to get rid of this problem of leachate, in order to get rid of the problem of leaking of those toxins into the surrounding regions, you do have the presence of a sanitary landfill. Now, in a sanitary landfill, what is done is basically that the excavated portion, first of all, is covered with a non-porous membrane. Base is covered with a non-porous membrane. Now, this can be certain types of biodegradable plastics, or generally what is done is that you provide a layering of stones and then a kind of a clay as well, a non-pervious and a non-porous clay, so that all the various different wastes, they keep on getting accumulated on top without the problem of leaching. So this is done to get rid of the problem of leaching. Okay, that is why it is carried out. Now here, if you take a look at it, they are more sanitary and are constructed in a methodical manner to eliminate the problem of leaching. That is the prime purpose of constructing a sanitary landfill. And they are constructed on impermeable soil where that leaching problem will not happen, and lined with impermeable materials such as biodegradable plastics in certain cases, or simply plastics and clay. Now, the limitation is the costly transportation of the municipal solid waste to far away landfill sites. MSW here stands for the municipal solid waste. Done to get rid of the problem of leaching. Okay, the leaching which happens in the case of the open dump, the leaching of materials which happens in the case of the landfill, this is done to get rid of that problem. That is why in the excavated area is basically covered at the bottom and the base as well. Then we also have the role of the incineration plants. What is incineration? Incineration is the process of burning, right? Of combustion. So when we say incineration plants, so incineration is when you burn the garbage in massive furnaces at very high temperature. It is used to utilize energy or minimize landfill area, because any landfill area, if you would have basically dumped all the waste without treating it, then it would occupy a larger volume. But if you burn it down, obviously the amount of waste would be reduced, the amount of waste matter would be reduced. Now, as you carry out the combustion process, now there are significant amount of hot combustion gases, which include N2, CO2, H2O, the waste gas in general, oxygen, and other combustible residue, carbon residue, etc. Now, energy is also produced in the process. When you burn the garbage, energy is produced as a byproduct. So, energy is produced in the process. Okay. Now, this energy which is produced can be utilized for conversion of water into steam, for boiling water in general, and that energy can be utilized for running and functioning of turbines, generation of electricity can be used for electricity production. Okay, so that is basically the role played by the incineration plants. Then this is, again, this is where you burn the garbage. Now you cannot end up burning the garbage without treating the waste gases. Now, without treating the waste gases, if you're burning the garbage, you are polluting the environment even more than what the normal conditions or the normal processes would have done so. So that is why here you have to always end up treating the waste gases. So the waste gases need to be treated. Okay. Now, then you have pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is a partial burning. It is an incomplete combustion. It is a complete combustion is carried out in incineration plant. Pyrolysis is a kind of an incomplete burning where you don't provide oxygen. For any combustion process to happen, oxygen is a necessary input that you need to provide for any combustion to be carried out. So in the case of pyrolysis, there is the burning of materials in the absence of oxygen or in a controlled atmosphere of oxygen. So when you have an absence of oxygen, there is incomplete burning, combustion. Now, not all the kinds of wastes, they can be carried out through the process of pyrolysis. Okay, so this is not how all the various different waste can be treated. Only the organic waste, the carbonaceous waste, for example, firewood, coconut, palm trash, corn combs, cashew shell, paddy straw, sawdust. These are so carbon based organic compounds. They undergo or they are carried through the process of pyrolysis. Because if you carry out the incomplete combustion of the inorganic or the non biodegradable compounds, then it will not solve any purpose for that matter. So here you need to carry out the only carbonaceous organic waste is burned. Now, because there is partial burning, the entire carbon won't undergo the complete combustion, or the entire compound will not experience the complete combustion. So, as a consequence of that, you have the remnant portion of uh, charcoal which is generated when you do not, or let's say when you take a case of wood. Now, if you burn the wood entirely, completely, that would require too much amount of oxygen as well. Here you are not providing oxygen, so you carry out incomplete combustion. So that wood will be converted into a wood charcoal, or any carbon compound would be converted into charcoal. So here get converted into charcoal. Now that charcoal basically can be utilized as a source of energy for various industries, for various power plants in certain cases, and they can be used as a source of energy where they can be burnt after that in order to produce energy eventually. So this can be used as a source of energy. Okay, they can be used always as a source of energy. So why not inorganic waste? Because if you burn or carry out a an incomplete combustion of inorganic waste, it will not produce any charcoal. It will simply add on to the waste generated. So for that, you have incineration plant where you carry out the combustion of organic as well as inorganic waste. But here the purpose is to produce some source of energy in the process, so that that particular charcoal which is produced can serve after that as well. Is that understood, Avni? Or is there a doubt which still prevails? How to treat waste games? In the Preet, your question is not very clear. Stubble can be burnt here, yes. They can be partially burnt here. Not inorganic because there is no carbon to produce charcoal, even if there is some amount of carbon, but there are other impurities as well. And that impurities won't allow the combustion of carbon to happen at all. So you will have a kind of a amorphous waste which is accumulated, and that won't solve any purpose at all. Okay. Now, after this, we have the process of composting. Composting is the process of biological degradation in simple terms. Okay. How to treat the waste gases? Okay. So the waste gases, basically, they can be treated with the help of scrubbers, so, or filters as well. So what are scrubbers? So scrubbers, basically, you have wet scrubbers, dry scrubbers, so in which the waste gases, they are passed through a kind of a setup. Okay. So here, let's suppose the waste gases are put through here. And after that, they are, first of all, these gases, they are treated with sprays of water, so that the heavy contaminants and the particulate matter, they settle down, which can be separated. Then they are put through the various different set of filters, and these filters, these have chemical reagents on them which will react. Let's suppose few of the chemical reagents will react only with sulfur dioxide, few of the chemical reagents will react only with, for example, the nitrous oxide. So that is how, with each different filter and each different layer, you can have the accumulation and treatment of those gases, and eventually you can have the clean gas at the end of it, or a clearer gas. Okay. Now, composting is where organic waste, they are decomposed, they are degraded. So a decomposition process is carried out. So it is a biological process in which the degradable organic waste is decomposed into a humus like substance. We have studied about the various stages of decomposition earlier. So that decomposition is carried out. It is done in the presence of oxygen by various microorganisms, primarily fungi and bacteria. They carry out the process of decomposition, but oxygen is required. For the process of decomposition to happen, you do need the availability of oxygen. You do need the availability of oxygen in terms of the airflow as well. You do need the availability of microorganisms, and you do need the availability of some amount of moisture, some amount of in terms of warmth as well. Warmer temperature is where the rate of decomposition is really high. Now, the final product is high in carbon and nitrogen and can be utilized as a manure. Can be used as an organic manure. Okay, that can be used always as an organic manure. And this nitrogen is anyways very much required for the augmentation of soil fertility, because the plants require nitrogen. It is one of the macronutrients that the plants require. And almost all the soil is naturally poor in nitrogen. So when you enrich the soil with these particular components, what do we have as a result of that? As a direct consequence, as a direct result of that, you will have the lesser requirement of fertilizers and chemical inputs. So, less requirement of chemicals and artificial fertilizers. Okay, so it makes the crops, makes the process of agriculture more eco-friendly. Okay, that is what is carried out in the process of composting. So the compost which is generated is basically a dark brown kind of substance. So here, if you will observe, the input required for the composting to happen is for basically the organic matter. That can include leaves, straw, woody materials, grass, food items, or the kitchen waste, manures, all of them. In the presence of moisture, moisture is a must. In the presence of air, because oxygen is required, and the suitable microorganisms which are already present in the soil. So the naturally occurring microorganisms, okay, naturally occurring microbes. Okay, now heat is produced as a byproduct in the process, produced as a byproduct in the entirety of the process. Okay, now then you have vermiculture. In the case of vermiculture, here also decomposition and degradation is carried out, but that degradation and decomposition is initiated and is particularly aided by the presence of worms, that is the earthworm. Now, earthworms, they are also referred to as a farmer's friend because they provide the natural aeration into the soil by moving through the various different portions of the soil. They allow for the passage of air to happen. Also, they end up improving the soil texture. They reduce the size of the grains of the soil in general. And also, they carry out fragmentation of the waste at an accelerated pace. Okay, they carry out fragmentation of the waste at a very significant accelerated pace. Now, these worms break the waste, and the added excreta of the worms makes the compost very, very significantly rich in various different nutrients. So, this is also a basic form of decomposition. This is carried out for biodegradable waste. Okay, always consider that. Then we have the process of bioremediation. Now, what is that? We have already talked about it earlier this morning that bioremediation is where you end up using certain microorganisms such as plants or microbial or plant enzymes to detoxify contaminants in the soil and other environments. So you accelerate the rate of decomposition, you accelerate the rate of natural decomposition by introduction of the microorganisms which can be naturally found or the lab created microbes as well. So these microbes can be natural ones found in the surrounding under normal circumstances or can be artificial lab grown. Okay, so that is basically a process of bioremediation. So here, what it does is accelerates the rate of decomposition. Now, there can be various different methodologies of bioremediation, but in all of them, the basic purpose is to attain the heightened rate of decomposition. Okay, so in certain areas, let's suppose there is contamination in the soil underneath. Now there, what can be done is that, let's suppose there is a natural presence of microorganisms, but there might not be significant amount of air available, so you pump in air. In certain areas, it might be possible that the groundwater gets contaminated, so there you pump in the various different microbes as well as the various amount of air into the groundwater. Sometimes that moisture is required, so you provide that moisture. So whichever material out of any of these agents which carry out decomposition, any of these materials whichever is lacking, that is provided in order to degrade the waste, in order to decompose the waste, in order to create a kind of a return to the natural system. So you have various different methodologies. For example, you have bio-venting, bio-augmentation, biosparging, etc. Now, in all of them, the process is aimed at only one final outcome, and that is the decomposition of the contaminant or the decomposition of the waste. But overall, bio-venting is a process. Venting is what? When you talk about a vent, what is a vent? Vent is a passage that you provide for the provision and the passage of air, isn't it? That is what you refer to as a vent, where you end up providing a kind of a passage for the passing of air. That is what we refer to as a vent, right? So in this, let's suppose you have a contaminated region. Now, in that contaminated region, you provide the oxygen and the various different nutrients. Nutrients for what? Nutrients for the enriched growth of microbes. So these nutrients which you are providing, so these nutrient injection that you see, nutrient injection is to accelerate the growth of certain kinds of microbes. Okay, now they will work upon the contamination. Generally, it is carried out whenever you have a municipal solid waste which is accumulated in a region or which has polluted the soil underneath. Generally, it is carried out for those particular purposes. Now, here there is a problem, however. The problem is that in the long run, let's suppose all that contamination has been degraded. But then the microbes, they do not know whether the contamination is done or not. You have not programmed these microbes that stop once the contamination is taken care of. So sometimes what happens, as the microbial population exponentially rises up, even after taking care of the contaminant, they will continue to work upon any kind of organic matter which is present in the soil. And they will carry out the complete decomposition till the phase of mineralization. And when mineralization is carried out, will the soil have organic compound or not at the end of mineralization? Does the soil have organic component or not? Do we remember that? Good. So at the end of mineralization, you don't have any organic component which is left over. So that is a major drawback of this, or one of the major problems that one has to take care of. So in this case, the problem is, or the issue is, even after the waste is catered to. Waste is taken care of. The microbes carry out decomposition of organic materials of the soil. So oftentimes you need to stop that. You need to be able to prevent that. And that becomes an issue. Largely done for the municipal solid wastes. Largely done for municipal solid waste. Okay. Then you have bio augmentation. What is this bio augmentation, or what is the process of bio augmentation? In this, you provide the specific kind of microbes, not the naturally found one in the region. You introduce a specific kind of microbe, you introduce the specific kind of nutrient which is required for the growth of the microbes, so that the type of distinct waste, such as oil spill, etc., or the heavy contaminant which has happened, that can be taken care of. So, in this specific kind of microbes and their nutrients are introduced. Okay, specific kind of microbes and their overall nutrients, they are basically introduced. And that is when they are introduced, then certain heavy contaminants and heavy toxins, they are catered to. That is the difference between bioventing and bioaugmentation. Here you have the naturally found microbes which work. Here you introduce the specific kind of microbes. So here naturally occurring, okay, naturally occurring microbes are worked upon. Then you have the process of biosparging as well. What do we understand by biosparging? So in the case of the biosparging, it involves, here also you provide a vent, but here air is provided with a very high pressure. And that injection of air is done in the region of the groundwater. Okay. That injection of air is done in the region of groundwater, underground water. Now that air continues along with moisture, it takes in certain amount of moisture, then from the lower portion it goes into the contaminated area, and then there is a significant amount of degradation which is carried out. So here the injection of high pressured air at a significant high pressure is injected right up till the level of groundwater. So what it does is it increases the groundwater oxygen concentration and enhances the rate of biological degradation of the contaminants by the naturally occurring bacterium. So here also you don't introduce any kind of additional different types of specific lab grown microbes. The naturally occurring microbes that are there, they will carry out the process. But the difference from the earlier of bioventing is here you pump that air into the level of the groundwater. This increases the availability of oxygen and moisture into the region of contamination. So increases the availability of air and moisture in the region of groundwater. Okay, that is what is referred to as biosparging. Then, land farming. Now, what is land farming? This is an ex situ method of handling the waste. Contaminated, let's suppose there has been a contamination which has happened in the midst of the urban landscape, where there has been a lot of contaminant in between the urban areas. Now, what do is you basically end up providing significant, or you transport that particular contaminated layer of the soil, you spread it over a separate region, and then you farm it out in the sense that you provide the presence of water, and because you have spread it over, there is natural exchange of oxygen, and you provide those nutrients in order to carry out the degradation in a separate specific area. So this is an ex situ method of handling of waste. Ex situ method of waste handling. Okay, that is the land farming that we talk about, where the contaminated soil is transported to a different region and then treated. Okay, so this is when you have significant contamination happening in the urban landscape, in the populated areas. So carried out as a method when contamination happens in populated areas. Okay. Chinu, what is ex situ and in situ? So when you talk about in situ refers to in the place itself where there is contamination which has happened, that is in situ, where you treat that waste in that place itself. So in situ refers to where you don't have to transport anything. Even in conservation measures, we'll see that there are two basic forms or two basic principles involved in conservation. One is ex situ conservation, one is in situ conservation. So in situ is where you don't have to transport anything. Wherever it is naturally to be found, there only you carry out the conservation or any particular activity that you carry it out in that naturally occurring place itself. Ex situ is when you basically transport the material to some other place for treatment, for conservation, anything. So where you have to transport it to a region where it is not naturally to be found. Okay, I hope that is understood, right? Then we have the composting bioremediation. Now, in the case of the composting bioremediation, this is a simple process of decomposition which is carried out, and this brings together contaminated soil with non-hazardous organic materials, and there is a natural decomposition of organic material to produce soil or manure, organic substances. Okay, So these are your various different methodologies by which the waste handling is done by the process of bioremediation. Okay, so we have seen integrated waste management. We have taken a look at the various different types of waste management, that is the open dump, landfill, sanitary landfill, and we have also taken a look at bioremediation. Then we come across to the various different government initiatives in order to handle the waste and in order to tackle the waste, that all the types of waste that we have talked about. So what are the various governmental initiatives for the process? So the government has basically come up traditionally with various different rules and measures. So for example, you have the solid waste management rules 2016, which was considered landmark, in the sense landmark because you have creation of certain provisions in the solid waste management rule, which talked about augmentation of the facilities and infrastructure of the urban bodies as well. Then plastic waste management rules 2016 amended in 2018 and then further amended in 2022, which we'll take a deeper look into. Biomedical waste rules of 2016, e-waste management rules, which have again been amended in later part of 2022, hazardous and other waste rules, and then you have the battery waste management rules. So this also has been amended. Hazardous and other waste has also been amended in 2019. So not all of this is relevant for your examination. Ideally, for your examination purposes, you should be aware of solid waste, plastic waste, and e-waste. These are few of the ones important for your mains exam. Okay, important for mains. The ones that I have marked, those are important for your mains. And other than that, here, amendments, any amendments, future amendments, that is to be understood, noted for prelims. Okay, any future amendments which are carried out or which are to be carried out, kindly take a note of that as well. So before coming into the intricacies of the plastic waste, the e-waste management rule, etc., here we introduce ourselves to the concept of EPR, what is also referred to as extended producer responsibility. So what do we understand by EPR or extended producer responsibility? That is basically when you hold the producer responsible for the waste generated by the consumer. So how does it fit into the process of waste management? So let's suppose any individual, let's suppose take yourself as an example or myself as an example. Let's suppose we are very environmentally conscious. We are very conscious to the fact that there is no significant amount of waste which should be generated, no significant amount of waste which should be accumulated. Now, if I go out to the market to buy a bottle of water, chances are I'll buy a plastic bottle. Now, after using that plastic bottle, the plastic bottle in there also, it is always suggested that crush the bottle and then throw it off, dispose it off. So there I'm generating plastic waste, but not because I want to generate plastic waste, because I was thirsty, because I wanted to fulfill some basic requirements and I had no other option but to generate that waste. So who is responsible for this? It is the bottle manufacturer. They could have manufactured it in a biodegradable packaging material or an environmentally friendly packaging material, isn't it? So whenever you talk about a producer, it need not necessarily be producer itself. It can be what is referred to as PIBO, that is producer, importer, or brand owner. Any of these, they will be included within this. Okay, producer, importer, or brand owner. So let's suppose you have either the producer or the importer, any of them. Let's consider the PIBO setup itself. Now this PIBO basically sells it to the wholesalers, then they will give it to the retailers, then they will give it to the consumer, and it is the consumer who will generate that waste, isn't it? So in a way, that producer is responsible for the treatment of the waste. For waste treatment. Now, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of having an EPR is not only to cater to a kind of an increased amount. For example, you have increased amount of plastic waste which is generated, increased amount of e-waste which continue to get generated. So not only will it cater to the waste management aspect, it would also end up ensuring for a significant proportion that the producers or the importers or the brand owners, in a way, they are nudged towards a more eco-friendly packaging material and a more eco-friendly manufacturing process, where the products themselves, they are much more eco-friendly, because if they end up manufacturing products which are eco-friendly, then there won't be significant waste generated, isn't it? So that is why the purpose is twofold: to fix the accountability of waste management, accountability of waste management, and secondly, to nudge the producers to manufacture eco-friendly products. Eco-friendly products. Okay, so that is basically the entire concept of EPR which is involved. Now, this is generally used even for biomedical waste. Sometimes this is used for the plastic waste. This is also used for e-waste which is generated. For all of them, EPR, they come into the picture. So, first of all, we take a look at the various changes which have been the latest amendments which have been brought in. For example, in the Plastic Waste Management Rules 2022 and also the E-Waste Management Rules 2022, both of them have been amended. Let us try to understand that. So, here the ministry introduced the amendment and the changes into the plastic waste rules of 2022. Now, here they included and they further strengthened the EPR for plastic packaging. Because in general, you would also have experienced that when you go to the market to buy any product, the amount of packaging done is so extensive and so significant that it takes you a good amount of time to get rid of the plastic and before unboxing or uncovering the main product itself. Now, who is to account for that particular plastic waste? Many of the times you would have seen that if you order something from any of the e-commerce websites, be it Flipkart or Amazon, you would have observed that the material that you have ordered might be this big, this small, but the package in which it comes might be this big, where you have multiple different rolls of plastic packaging which is done, and then you have that material which is placed. So that is why this plastic packaging for that EPR has been brought in. Now, here the earlier rules have been amended, And this has been amended for the purpose of elimination of single-use plastic and promote alternatives. So recycling is also promoted in this as per these rules. Video and audio are not available. Kindly refresh it. Okay. For all of us, video and audio are available, or is there any issue in that? No issue. So kindly refresh it, Sundaresh. So here, when we talk about the purpose here, so EPR in plastic packaging, for any amendment, any bill which is introduced, and I'm sure you would be also following the, if you have time, currently the Lok Sabha session and the Parliament session, in fact, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha sessions, they are going on. So ideally, if you want to get your concepts of polity and your concepts of the functioning of the governance system, if you want to get that clearer, there is no better source of information and no other source of book as compared to the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha TV. If ever you get a chance, and I don't know how many of you, few of you, I know for a fact that you have a habit of watching those, so that is something which will help you significantly to clear your concepts. So for any amendment bill which is introduced, if you would have observed, first of all, the purpose is mentioned, that for what purpose are we introducing that particular bill. Only after that purpose is mentioned, then you have the bill which is carried out. So what is the purpose for this? EPR in plastic packaging, then categorization of plastic packaging, to encourage reuse and recycle, reuse and recycle, and also in a way elimination of single use plastics. Okay, so that is basically the prime purpose behind this rule. Now let us understand what the categorization is. Now categorization, again, this is these amendment rules that is relevant for your prelims, for your mains examination. Okay, for your mains examination, that is, so even if you are appearing for the mains next year or year after that, this amendment rule becomes important. So what is done here? First of all, for the plastic packaging, let us understand that. Now here, reuse of rigid plastic packaging material has been mandated in the guidelines to reduce the use of fresh plastic material. So reuse has been mandated. That is the extract of it. Reuse has been mandated. Okay. Then after that, EPR certificates. Now this is where it is considered to be very forward looking, and for this the environment ministry and the environment minister actually received praise from all sides of the benches of the parliament, even from opposition benches, etc., and even from many sections of environmentalists, because this has got a forward looking agenda and this can significantly alter the way in which we take care of the EPR or we handle the EPR. But obviously, whenever there are few people who will give you support for that, there will be multiple people who would also oppose that. So there is a significant opposition and the concern for that as well. As a civil services candidate, you should be able to look at both sides of the argument. Always, I will maintain that. The ability to look at both sides of the argument, that is only what will make you neutral. Otherwise, in the present day context, Earlier, what used to happen was around 20 years back, 25 years back, there would be only one source of information, that would be the national news, the DD1 news that you would have, and the basic newspapers, and they would have the narrative of one particular kind. So always it would be a simple narrative which would be built up. But in the present day of polarized world, it is very easy to form a biased opinion, something that you should absolutely refrain from. So here, what are these EPR certificates and what is the purpose of that? So first of all, understand what is the problem with EPR that we are facing. So I'll take you back to that particular slide where we talked about the EPR. Now here I talk about the PIBO. Okay, and understand this once, that is something which will be applicable even in the case of e-waste. Okay, now I'll take the example of any particular kind of a waste. Let's assume I'll take the case of any of those large e-waste or electronic item manufacturers. Let's take the case of Samsung, or let's take the case of Apple. Now, Apple is a company which specializes in manufacturing of gadgets, electronic items. That is its specialty. Electronic items. Now, Apple, suppose, is held under this EPR norms, that you have to be responsible for the e-waste that you generate, or the your users will generate. Now, Apple's specialty is the manufacturing of electronic items. Apple's specialty is not that where it will accumulate the waste, how to handle the waste, how to extract the waste materials or the important items from the waste materials, or how to recycle. That is not the specialty of Apple, is it? So that brings about a kind of a failure to complete these EPR targets. Majority of the plastic large scale, let's say large scale manufacturer, for example, you go out there to buy a refrigerator or a television set, it will be wrapped in so many layers of styrofoam and plastic that that particular company, while packaging it, has provided. Now you cannot expect a company like Sony to be specializing in recycling of plastic. That is not its specialty, is it? So that is where what has been done. It was found out that majority of these PIBOs, they have not been able to fulfill their EPR targets, which have been set by the government. Why? Because there is a lack of specialization. They don't have the ability to handle it. So what they end up doing in the process is, let's suppose you, after 3 attempts or 4 attempts, you decide to open up a startup, let's suppose. And that startup you have, because you have studied there is a lot of scope in waste to energy, so you open up a startup for waste to waste minimization, or a kind of a waste utilization, waste recycling, etc. So you open a particular company, ABC, and your specialty is not manufacturing of plastic or manufacturing of electronic items. Your specialty is waste handling, and management. That is your specialty. Now you are taking care of the waste which is generated. So for the waste that is generated, you will be given EPR certificates, because you are handling that waste. So all that waste that you have handled, let's suppose you have handled 1,000 tons or 100 tons of waste. Let's assume that you have handled 100 tons of waste. 100 tons. Right. Now for these 100 tons, you will be rewarded with certificate for that. The government agency, the ministry will give you with the certificate for the 100 tons. Now let's suppose Apple had a target that you have to take care of 50 tons of waste. You have to ensure recycling and management of 50 tons. Let's suppose the target is 50 tons. Now, here, Apple doesn't have the capability or the wherewithal to carry out that waste management. So what it can do is, it can buy the certificate from this ABC. That certificate is bought for 50 tons. And in return, Apple will pay ABC significant amount of rupee. Right? Now, that is basically where you are trading the APR certificate. It can also happen. It can also happen in a way where, let's suppose, ABC has sold this to a particular bank or any particular FI, financial institution. Financial institution, let's suppose. Now, if you have given it to a particular financial institution, that financial institution will then pay ABC some amount of money. Okay. And that financial institution will sell it, the certificate, to PIBO. Right? And that PIBO will pay money to this. So that means the certificate can be traded. By the way, I'm sure all of us, if we have attended geography, I'm sure by this point of time, all of us would also have attended economic session, right? Are we comfortable with economy? Can we give the example of economy? Or are we not comfortable with the subject of economy? Yes, you're comfortable with that? Perfect. So you would have studied about the commercial papers, right? You would have studied about the commercial papers, CDRs, etc. Are we aware of that? In the portion of banking, I'm sure you would have studied about the commercial papers, etc. Right? So you do know that they can be traded eventually, and it is the holder of that commercial paper who will get paid the money. Comfortable? So that is the same aspect of this certificate as well. Okay? Now, after this, here, when we take a look at it, so basically, you will observe that EPR in a significant first guidelines allow for sale and purchase of surplus EPR certificates, and it sets up a market mechanism for the plastic waste management. Now, what it does is makes the achievement of target possible, which in earlier cases many of them could not do so. Allows establishment of companies or organizations with expertise, then caters to waste management and eventually in the process generates economic activity. Okay, it is able to generate economic activities as well in the process. Okay, then there will be a maintenance of a centralized online portal, and that centralized online portal will be maintained by the CPCB. Okay, for what? For registration as well as filing of annual returns by the producers, importers, and brand owners, that is the PIBOs, plastic waste processors of all the waste. That is, what is the amount of waste that you are generating, what is the amount of waste that you are handling, all of that will be catered, and for that the PIBOs will have to register themselves on this online portal. Now, the categorization of plastics. So there have been various categories and the categorization has been done. So category 1, category 2, 3 and 4. So what are these categories? So in category 1, rigid plastic packaging, which are harder, right, which do not end up bending very easily, which are used to package, let's suppose you have the presence of very thick styrofoams or thermocols in general, that can be used. Category 2, that flexible plastic packaging of single layer or multi-layer, where you have more than one layer with different layers of plastic involved, plastic sheets and covers made of plastic sheet, carry bags, plastic sachet or pouches for the packaging. In many of the materials that you order that or that you buy, you have the supply of those materials in the case of plastic pouches, isn't it? They will be included in category 2. Then category 3, multi-layered plastic packaging. And then there at least you have one layer of plastic, maybe one layer of styrofoam, one other layer of plastic and so on, to provide a kind of a cushioning effect. So you have the plastic materials which are able to do so, that will be in this. Plastic sheet or like used for packaging, as well as carry bags made up of compostable plastics fall under this category. So here this includes mostly all the single use plastics that you will see, they will be included here. Okay, right? I hope that is understood. Now, then comes the e-waste management rules 2016. Now, these e-waste management rules 2016 were brought in to cater to the increased amount of e-waste which is being generated. Sridevi, that bubble-like coverage that you have, the bubble wrap that you see. So that bubble wrap will come under category 3, okay? Or even in category 2, depending upon what kind. So all the bubble wraps, they are not of the same type. So many of the bubble wraps the pop-up wraps that you have, where you actually pop up the various bubbles, I hope that is what you're talking about. So there, it can be included in category 2 as well. And very few of them, they can be included in category 3, but mostly the category 2. Okay, so this is where you have the bubble wraps. Now then, e-waste management rules 2016. Now it includes the CFLs or the compact fluorescent lamps, as well as other lamps with mercury or the other various equipment. So all the various electronic and electrical items, they basically are included in the e-waste management rule. Now the rules for the first time bring producers under the ambit of the EPR. So rules of 2016. Now, producers have been made accountable for the e-waste collection and e-waste exchange as well. And here, even the solar cells, the PV cells, the photovoltaic cells, the solar panels, because when you have an increased stress on solar energy and production and generation of solar energy, obviously there will be generation of lot of that solar waste as well. So that has also been included in the e-waste. Now, additional stakeholders here include manufacturers, dealers, refurbishers, and so on. Now, here, basically, you will observe that groups such as hotels, residential colonies, bulk producers of consumer goods, ports, railway stations, airports, and pilgrimage spots, these generate e-waste in large bulk. These generate e-waste in bulk. Because any of them that you talk about, railway stations, airports, etc., whenever you go there, there is some or the other electronic item which is being replaced perpetually. When you talk about the hotels, some or the other electronic item is consistently being replaced. And in your house, it might happen that your fan also might not work, right? Somehow you are surviving without fan as well. But the moment you step into a hotel, you would want even the smallest of the bulb to operate. Even if you are not using the bulb, you will end up calling the hotel desk 10 times that why is that bulb not operating, or change my room. So that is basically these areas where they generate bulk quantities of e-waste. So this is to ensure that the solid waste generated in these facilities are also treated and recycled. Now, here basically what are the salient features of the new rules, the amendment which has been brought about in 2022. So what are the salient features of them? So here again there will be a portal, just like in the case of the plastic ones you had a centralized online portal. Here also you will have a kind of a portal. So all the manufacturer, producer, refurbisher and recycler are required to register themselves on the portal. If you want to carry out any kind of business, you do need to register yourself on the portal. So any kind of functionality won't be carried out, won't be observed without that registration on the portal, and that will be utilized for tracking purposes, that what is the amount of waste that is you generated, if you are able to fulfill your targets, designated targets or not, and that is open to inspection by the CPCB as well. Now, authorization has been replaced by registration, and only manufacturer, producer, refurbisher, and recycler, they require registration. Now, various electronic and electrical equipments, triple E stands for that, electronic and electrical equipments. So, producers have been given annual e-waste recycling targets. They have been allocated annual e-waste recycling targets based upon the previously amount of sold electronic and electrical equipments or sales of electronic electrical equipment as they are expected to generate, or what is the present circumstances. Now the targets are made stable for 2 years, right? So the targets, for example, let's suppose you are generating 100 units of e-waste, 100 units of electronic item. So for example, in the year 23-24, you will have a target of taking care of 60% of that waste which is generated. Okay, you will be responsible for 60%. Then that will be made stable for 2 years, from 2023 to 2025. Then that target will be accelerated to 70% for the year 2025 to 2027. So there is a progressive improvement of the target. 80% for the year up till 27 to 29. And that is how you have the progressive improvement of the target. Okay. So here, progressive increment in the target to handle waste. Okay. And why is it that it has been made stable for 2 years? To ensure greater compliance. Okay. Stable target for 2 years. To ensure greater compliance. Yes, these are very, very important for your mains examination, Sri. Very relevant for your mains examination. Okay. Then the quantity recycled will be computed on the basis of end product, so that there is no kind of a cross claim which is made that I have also claimed that I have taken care of this waste, I have also taken care of this waste. So in order to avoid that, quantity recycled on the basis of the end product. Provision for generation and transaction of EPR certificates. So here also EPR certificate, the norm has been provided. Now verification and audit will be carried out. And also there will be a steering committee which will be formed to oversee and implement these rules. So overall, this has been brought about to strengthen the EPR regime to ensure greater handling of the e-waste, more responsible handling of the e-waste. And here the provision has also been provided for reduction of hazardous substances in the manufacturing, such as lead, mercury, etc. So their usage to be reduced in the manufacturing of electronic and electrical equipment. So their usage has to be reduced. Okay, so every producer has to ensure that eventually their products do not contain lead, mercury, or any other hazardous substances beyond the maximum prescribed concentration. Okay, now another thing that has been done earlier, remember when we were talking about the e-waste, we were talking about the fact that how many of the workers, they work in abject conditions, in very bad conditions, and these workers, they do require significant amount of, let's say, upskilling, etc. So they also provide for recognition and registration, skill development, monitoring, and ensuring safety and health of workers involved in dismantling this. So this is to improve the working environment, to improve the working and upskilling of the workers. Okay, I hope this is understood. Any doubt which prevails? Is it required these data we need to learn? Yes, data, the target setting data, yes, you need to learn that target setting data. Okay, now then we come to the solid waste management rules of 2016. What are these solid waste management rules, and why do I say that this was a kind of a landmark in terms of how do we handle the solid waste? Because for the first time it catered to certain areas that nobody was comfortable to talk about, but everybody knew that this problem does exist. Okay, so that, now has that been implemented completely? Obviously no. Again, public participation and public, the role of the larger general public is very significant. So here, what is it? Segregation of waste at source has to be done. Segregation at source, that is, you basically distinguish or separate the waste into biodegradable, non-biodegradable waste. Now, answer this honestly. In your region, in your locality, how many of you have observed this to be a norm? This is still very rare. Only in larger cities of the country, only in the larger societies of the country, or the larger societies of these cities, would you observe that segregation of source at source to be happening, where waste to be separated into biodegradable, non biodegradable, medical waste, that segregation. Obviously, that is not to be carried out, right? That is not at all carried out. In many of the areas, that is not carried out. Only you have certain RWAs, or the certain residential welfare societies. Only they are able to do so. They are enforcing that. That is why people do so. Otherwise, if you talk about the larger countries, still you have 99% of the population which doesn't segregate the waste at source. Okay, who basically they have a habit of wrapping it in a piece of plastic and then throwing it away. Now that piece of plastic can consist of medical waste also, biodegradable waste also, non-biodegradable waste also, because the expectation is somebody out there will do it. Okay, so can I collect and write all acts, agreements, protocol, etc. in various pages? That is what is required to be done, my dear friend. If you are following that technique, that is something which is very much required to be done. That will always allow for faster revision process. Then collection and disposal of sanitary waste. So collection and disposal of sanitary waste has to be done. It cannot be commingled and thrown at the same time. Collect back scheme for the packaging waste as a part of EPR. Now, another one which met with a lot of public anger, lot of protests at various different levels, and lot of various brickbats to be thrown on the side of the government as well. User fees for collection. And there was a formalization which was provided in this bill, that waste collection is a service that they are providing to you. The government is providing you a service. They are collecting your waste. And for that, they need to be paid. They are not asking you to pay 5,000, 10,000 rupees for the collection of the waste. They are asking you a nominal sum so that they can take care of the waste logistics. They can ensure that they pay the people that they employ. The rag pickers, the garbage pickers, the segregators that they employ, they should be paid. But then, what was the outcome of it? People were, in general, I don't know how many of you recall this, there were a lot of various different protests, various different opposition which was done. And the normal thought process is that one thing that I'm doing is I'm basically providing you my garbage, which is so very pure and which is so very privileged. And then I should pay you for that as well. So people did not pay. People would not pay. And when the municipalities would come to collect, they would simply say that there is no garbage from my side. And silently, when the municipal trucks or the large auto rickshaws which collect that waste, they would move by, they would throw the waste on the road itself. That now the government will take care. Now who will take care of it? So that is where it is the role of the public to ensure that their region remains clean. And for that, some amount of money needs to be paid. For all of that, what is the larger public solution that the larger public provides? You interact with any individual in your society, any individual in your community, in your family, who maybe has not delved so deep into the various different topics. Ask them about it. They will tell you, why should we pay for this? And once you say that this is a service, they will tell you that the government should take it out of their own pocket. Okay, who will pay the salary for the various different rack pickers, etc.? The government should do it. Then you ask them, where does the government have the money? So much tax is paid. Do they pay the tax? No. On top of the fact that we have the one of the least number of formal taxpayers in the country, this adds to the problem of the poverty of the municipalities and the municipal organizations. And that is where, due to this, the garbage is as it is, not segregated, not collected at source, and significantly dumped. Then, waste processing and treatment and promoting the use of compost in farming to promote organic farming as well as waste handling. To promote organic production of crops and waste handling. Then promotion of waste to energy, that the waste which is generated, they should be utilized to produce energy, as is being done in the regions such as Singapore, etc. That is something which should be carried out. Now, this will minimize the waste as well. Minimize the waste generated and also fulfill the energy requirements. Okay. So these are few of the key pointers. By the way, from this area, UPSC has already asked a mains question previously, and the question was not complicated. The question was as simple and as direct as bring out the key provisions of the Solid Waste Management Rule 2016. So whenever such new waste management rules, etc., forest conservation, etc., comes into picture, that is how direct UPSC can be. In protocols and conventions, need to note all points or some important points only. The crux of it needs to be maintained, and also any new developments which have happened in the place. So UPSC is going to ask you about a particular convention or a particular protocol once it has been in discussion in the mains exam. In the prelims, UPSC has got a kind of a free run, and by the present pattern of prelims that you see, there have been a lot of random questions which are there. This is the reason why this year, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but generally when people get selected for various different services, uh, I hope all of us are aware that they have to report to the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy for Administration in Missouri. Now, many of them, they don't do so for the foundation course. The foundation course, which starts from the reporting is from 1st of August, and inauguration of the new batch is to happen tomorrow. So, and there's a lot of fanfare and a lot of hue and cry for that. So, generally, all the people who get selected, they are invited for that foundation course. Not many of them join. Ideally, around 420, 430 people, they end up joining the foundation course. Rest of them, they basically put in an additional year that I will give other attempt. This year, however, after looking at the question paper of the prelims this year, there has been a record number of joining for the foundation course, because people, they don't want to take the risk anymore, that once I have cleared this, let me take the services whatever I am getting. So this year already, Labasna has indicated that more than 500 people have joined for the foundation course, which is a kind of a record number for them, which they have never witnessed for the past couple of decades. So the prelims is turning out to be so very unpredictable that you have to ensure that your preparation is mains oriented. And if your preparation is mains oriented, your basics would be covered, and that is the only armory that you have, that is the only weapon that you have in your armory that will help you conquer the prelims. If you start chasing the kind of weird questions that are being asked in the prelims, that whether an orangutan uses a stick to eat ants, or whether the honeybee flaps its wings more to give an indication to food or not, if you start chasing these particular factual questions, there is no end to it, because next year UPSC will definitely not ask about orangutan, definitely not ask about honeybees. So that is why always have your preparation with an orientation to mains examination. Now, after this, we come to the portion of the noise pollution. Noise pollution, where you have an unwanted noise level or an unwanted level of noise which is created, that is noise pollution. So regular exposure to elevated sound level that may have adverse effect in human or other organisms, that is referred to as noise pollution. Okay, regular exposure to elevated sound levels that you have, that will have adverse effect. Okay, now noise pollution in our country is again a commonality. The moment you step outside of your house, you will be exposed to significant amount of noise pollution. So that is a common feature here. So basically, you have the noise pollution which is caused by various categories. In order to get rid of that, in order to have some amount of control of that, what is done is that various regions have been put under different categories, and there's a limitation about the total amount of noise pollution which can be done, right? Or the total amount of noise which can be emitted. So industrial area, the day limit, the night limit. Commercial area, also you have a day and a night limit. Residential area, and then you have the silence zones. Silent zones are those where you need to have a particularly lower level of noise. What are those silent zones? You have the educational institutions, hospitals, as well as the courts. Why? Because the judiciary wields the power, the one of the greatest power of them all. So an area comprising not less than 100 meters around hospitals, educational institutions, and courts would be declared as silent zone. It makes sense to declare a region around a hospital or an educational institution as a silent zone. But courts, well, courts are always situated in the externalities of the city limit. But still, when we talk about courts, the courts can set the norm. So that has been declared as a silent zone. Now you have various different types of noise pollution: construction activities, heavy traffic, then train horns, wild birds, frogs croaking. Now, majority of them, We don't even consider them as noise. For example, I'm sure majority of us, we would be very comfortable hearing the sound of the wild birds and thinking about that this is a kind of a pleasant sound. But then that is also an exceeding limit. So what are the various causes of noise pollution? So when you take a look at the various causes, industrialization, the working of the industries, and the working of the industries, that is something, and the running of the machineries. Industrialization means running of machineries, right? So that is the cause of noise. Poor urbanization. Now, if you have a kind of a planned urban landscape, there won't be that much amount of noise which is created. But when you have a poor level of urbanization, as is the case with all the urban areas of the country, even when you talk about the planned cities, you don't have many planned cities in our country. All are a kind of an inorganically set up or a kind of haphazard urban areas which have been created. Now, in almost all of them, you will observe that there are very narrow lanes and bylanes, very narrow. Now, in those narrow lanes or bylanes, if you have, let's say, even two-wheelers, when they crisscross, there is a kind of a rush there. But then what happens, what we end up doing is, because we are so very ambitious, we ensure that even trucks will move through here. We ensure from the other side, cars will also move in from there. Why? Because obviously traffic norms, who follows traffic norms? Nobody. Traffic norms is for the weak, isn't it? So that is why nobody follows traffic norms. So once you have these narrow lanes surrounded by tall buildings from all sides or tall constructions from all sides, now whenever you have a traffic jam, regardless of the fact that whether you are able to move or not, unless and until you honk 10 times, you blow the horn 10 to 12 times, there is not a greater level of satisfaction which is achieved. And you would have experienced this. That is why the modification of horns that you have, the number of modifications of horns that you have, that is one of the highest in our country. So that is where all these horns, we utilize it on the road. Now, where will that horn and the sound go? That will be reverberated through these areas, and that will create a lot of noise. So, poor urbanization and a concentration of population density leads to concentration of these noise levels in certain regions. Social events, which are a method or a process of celebration, etc., that becomes one of the largest areas of noise pollution. And at that point of time, nobody cares when you are celebrating. See, if you are not partaking in that social event, you will have a complaint that there is a lot of noise. If you are yourself are a participant or an organizer of a social event, the first thing that you prepare for while organizing any such event is what? A big loudspeaker. The bigger the loudspeaker is, the better it is. So that is obviously going to be a source of noise pollution. Transportation, be it the metro trains, be it the buses. If you talk about the state transport buses, they create noise with a vengeance of sorts, right? When the buses, they will start honking, well, there is no escape from that. Construction activities, now recently you had a kind of a notice which was given to certain builders in certain of the metropolitan, because they end up creating a lot of noise, especially during night time. Fireworks and loudspeakers, for that I don't need you don't need me to tell you. You yourself are much more mature to understand that these fireworks, even if it is a birthday, even if it is a 5 month anniversary of or a 5 month birthday of a kid, there will be fireworks, there will be loudspeakers, right? We basically require an excuse to create that noise, and we do love that noise as long as we are taking a part in that. Then agricultural machines, significant amount of noise pollution is caused. Defense equipments. Now, which defense equipments are we talking about when we talk about noise pollution here? Which kind of defense equipments? Let me see. Which can create a noise? Good, Benita. How many times have you heard the guns blaring? Have you heard guns in whichever area you are living? Have you heard the guns blaring? I don't think so. We don't have that kind of a condition in our country. Missiles. When was the last time that you heard the sound of a missile? Okay. Yes. Sonar is correct in the case of marine areas. So it is basically the kind of sonic booms which are created by perfect sonic booms which are created by the aircrafts, the helicopters, right? Good. So the aircraft, the helicopters, that is what is something which disturbs quite significantly. If you have been into the areas such as Gwalior, Pune, even for that matter, Goa, Ambala, uh, in these of the defense towns, if you have been there or if you have grown up in these areas, or Bangalore, now you would have consistently heard these kinds of supersonic sounds of the uh, planes moving by, the sonic booms created by them. So that is the noise. Now this also creates underwater noise as well. Yes, helicopters as well. So that creates underwater noise as well in many of the cases. Explosives. Here we are talking about the controlled explosives, not the explosives used for terrorist activities, the controlled explosives. Controlled explosives, controlled explosions. For what? For the purpose of mining, construction. For these activities, you use the control explosions. That creates significant amount of noise pollution. Effect of noise pollution, it brings about hypertension and sleeping disorders, especially amongst the younger and the older population. It brings about hearing loss, cardiovascular issues, strokes can happen, dementia, Alzheimer's, and it has got a very, very deleterious impact on the animals, the pets, for example. Any of you, if you would have seen the case of pets, you would have observed that how scared, or the normal species of animals that you find on the roads, you would basically be feeling pity for them, the amount of impact that it has. While rocket and satellite launching, yes, then you can talk about, yeah, that also creates noise pollution, but it is not a common occurrence. But yes, you can always list that. That is correct. Okay. So, due to contaminants, we have already taken a look into nitrates, cadmium, fluoride, mercury, arsenic. We have taken a look at all of these contaminants that will be relevant for your prelims, the portion that we have already covered earlier. Now we come to certain important conventions when it comes to handling of the waste and the various aspects of the waste. Okay, right? So we'll take a look at that. But before that, we'll take a break. And after break, Saurabh will address that. So we'll take a break of 10 minutes and then be back. Okay. A confirmation about the audio, please. If the audio is clear and available. Thank you. So, Saurabh, you had a question about the breaking of sound barrier, if relevant. So, even though that is something that you encounter in the portion of science and tech, sound barrier is referred to as whenever any object ends up moving at a speed faster than sound. That is what we refer to as the breaking of sound barrier. And when any particular object, or let's say an aircraft, or any object for that matter, when it moves faster than sound, it impacts the pressure of air. So that pressure wave which is created, that suddenly creates a kind of an explosive sound. And that is what we refer to as the sonic boom. So sonic booms are created whenever you have when we talk about sonic booms, that is created when there is generation of pressure waves upon exceeding the speed of sound. Okay, that is what is regarded as the sonic boom. Now, after this, I hope, Saurabh, that is clear. I hope after this we move to the portion of the important conventions. So these are the important international conventions when it comes to the handling of the various different types of waste and their management. This is something relevant for your prelims primarily. Okay. And here, generally, you get a match the following, or you can expect a match the following or a multiple statement like question. Match the following type of question. Okay. Now, when we talk about the Minamata Convention was brought about in order to handle the mercury poisoning and mercury contamination, because mercury contamination is what leads to the occurrence of the Minamata disease. So it is an international treaty designed to protect human health and environment from the various human caused factors such as mining, etc., which ends up releasing mercury and mercury compounds. It was signed in 2013. Now, after that, it covers all aspects of the life cycle of mercury, controlling and reducing mercury across a range of various different products, for example, mining, manufacturing and trade of mercury and products containing mercury at all, disposal of the waste of mercury, emissions of mercury from the industrial facilities. All of them are monitored and covered under the convention. Now, countries that have ratified are basically bound by the international law in order to put the controls in place to ensure that there is not significant amount of contamination of mercury. Now, mercury contamination causes Minamata disease. And what is that disease? It is characterized by peripheral sensory loss. That is, your sensory organs that we have on our body, they don't end up responding anymore due to nerve damage, tremors, or shaking. And both hearing as well as visual loss is experienced in the process. So, here, this Minamata disease is for the first time, it was experienced in the region of the Minamata Bay in Japan, where you had a lot of people falling ill because of consumption of that mercury contaminated fish. And this mercury travels through the system in the form of biomagnification. So mercury travels through the food chain by bioaccumulation. Okay. Now, after this, we have the Basel Convention. These are not the Basel norms that you have studied for banking in your portion of economics. So this is for the transboundary movement of the hazardous waste. Okay. Transboundary movement for the hazardous waste and their disposal. So for this, what this convention has brought into place is that if you want to, let's say, transfer some amount of hazardous waste or any waste in general which can consist of hazardous substances, so if you are transporting it from country A to a country B, let's suppose, if you are transporting the waste or any kind of materials there, then you require a prior consent approval, right? So from B, you need a prior consent, and then B needs to approve it. And only after that, the transboundary movement will happen. Now, what used to be a norm is that many of the developed nations would simply ship up their waste into these developing regions, into the underdeveloped nations and the LDCs, because and they would pay them some amount of money. But the long-term environmental damage that these countries, the developing and the underdeveloped nations, would face would be simply monumental. As late as last year, it was when Sri Lanka basically declined a shipment of waste from UK. That is where it caused a lot of furor amongst the European community, that how is it that a developing nation can say no to the waste that we generate. So in the name of the waste that they would sell to these particular countries, they would end up transporting a lot of those chemical toxicants and a lot of those hazardous waste, so that they would keep their own backyard clean, whereas the developing or the underdeveloped nations of the world, they would be suffering from this waste pollution. So it would protect human health and environment against the adverse impact. Now, the main focus of the convention is to prevent the movement of hazardous waste from the developed nations to the developing or underdeveloped nations of the world. Okay, and thereby reduce the transfer of hazardous waste across the countries of the globe. And as I told you, the various underdeveloped or developing nations, they would be buying those, or they would be given some amount of money for those wastes which would be shipped by the developed nations. Now, this has aimed to reduce the movement of waste which are toxic, flammable, explosive, and corrosive in nature. However, one thing that is relevant here, that is something that you need to cover for your prelims, is that radioactive wastes are not covered or controlled by the Basel Convention. Radioactive waste is not covered or controlled by the processes of the Basel Convention. Now, it also assists the least developed nations or the less developed countries in the environmentally sound management of these waste. How to handle these waste? What is the proper technology in order to carry out bioremediation, for example? So, that assistance, technical assistance, would be provided by the convention. Okay, so technical assistance would be provided to handle and treat the waste. The years are important for prelims? No. You don't need to learn the years when they have been incorporated or when they have been ratified. So that is something which you don't which you can easily ignore. Now, this also would ensure, the other purpose of it is to ensure the management of other countries by minimizing the amount of waste generated. Okay, so reduce the aspect of reduce, reuse, recycle. So here, reduction of the waste generated. So in all these conventions, I am writing the compilation or the gist of it on the side. So please use this for your revision purposes. Reduction of waste generated. And we are talking about hazardous waste. Now, the chief decision making body, as is the case with any convention, is the conference of parties. Okay, that is the chief decision making body. Here it meets twice a year. In the case of the Basel Convention, this particular portion is important for your prelims again. Okay, then after that, here are various different lists of waste under the Basel Convention. That includes the battery waste, the chemical waste, the toxicants included, the stubborn organic pollutant waste. Here, utilized oils, that is the engine oil which is used, etc. Then PCB compounds, mercury waste, ship intended for dismantling. Now, large amount of ships would be sent to these countries, and India amongst one of them. So earlier what used to happen is that after a ship runs its course and runs its lifetime, then it is dismantled and the various different products are recycled and then reused and refurbished. Now, earlier you had countries such as India who would basically specialize in that ship dismantling. Before India it was China. But as China grew in terms of economic prowess and prosperity, now that shifted, and that ship breaking mechanism and the entire ecosystem shifted to India. Now, even as India started rising up in terms of economic ladder, now it has shifted to Bangladesh. But still, in India, you have the region, for example, the Alang shipyard in Gujarat, which has one of the large shipbreaking facilities, which is one of the large shipbreaking facilities. Now, there you have the dismantling process which is carried out. But here, a lot of waste, such as asbestos, which is generated, can end up causing cancer amongst the workers in general. Silicosis is very common, and you have, these are what are referred to as the occupation based hazards, that because you are working in such an industry, you will basically be suffering from some disease or the other in the long run. Now, then we come to the Stockholm Convention. What is Stockholm Convention? Stockholm Convention primarily deals with the persistent organic pollutants, POPs. Okay, persistent organic pollutants, that means which stay in the food chain and the food system for a very long period of time. Okay, so they have a greater amount of resilience and persistence in the region of the environment ecology, as well as in the portion of the food chain. So they keep on accumulating in the body by the process of bioaccumulation. Obviously, they keep on accumulating in the body and causes a kind of a debilitating impact on the young ones as well as the adult population. Now, the Stockholm Convention divides the POPs into three annexes. The first two annexes list the POPs which needs to be eliminated, and the Annex 3 consists of the list of POPs produced and released unintentionally. Now, what are these POPs? Now, they stay for a longer period of time in the ecosystem, and they are highly toxic to humans and wildlife. They can last for many years in the environment before degrading into less dangerous forms. They end up accumulating in the food chain. Now, they are transported over large distances through air and water and can be found worldwide. Now, here, the chief characteristic of the POPs basically is that you have these certain chemical compounds, they come into the categories of POPs. You have chemical compounds such as dioxins. Now, here, not all the chemical compounds can stay into the environment for a very long period of time. So, what are the characteristics required? First of all, POPs, they need to be water insoluble. Why? Because if they are soluble in water, then they would be excreted or they would be discharged by the species immediately in the excreta, because the bodily fluids will dissolve it and they would discharge it. So only if they are water insoluble will they be able to stay in the system for a very long period of time. They are fat soluble. And hence they embed themselves into the fatty layers of the various different cells. That is where you'll find them to be embedded into. Okay, so that is how they get embedded into the fatty layer of the cells, and they are basically provided from one particular area to another, or one particular species to another, especially when it comes to lactating mothers, not only in humans but in general as well, in other species as well. So when the mother, or when the young one feeds on the mother's milk, that mother's milk is primarily dominated with the fatty cells and the fatty tissues. So those fatty cells and tissues, basically they add on to it, and that is where you have the contaminant which gets transported or transferred. So get embedded within the fatty layers, transported or moves through the food chain. Okay, then this is the categorization that you would see. These are the various POPs. So pesticides, industrial chemicals, and also the byproducts which are generated, they have been included as per the Stockholm Convention, to be controlled, to be eliminated. So basically all the various different POPs, they are categorized into three annexures. Annexes basically mean here the aspect of classification. So here one is, or the top two, they have to be eliminated completely, and the third one is which gets produced in an inadvertent manner and a non-intentional manner. Okay, so here the salient points of Stockholm Convention, again relevant for prelims, for prelims. So in this, the global environment facility is the designated interim financial mechanism for the Stockholm Convention to happen. So this provides the facility of financing. This is important. Then UNIDO takes the responsibility for developing nations and the transitioning economies to help them implement the Stockholm Convention for banning these POPs and developing an alternative. Gulam, annexes, is that understood now, or is it still not understood? The classification into annexes. Please let me know what is not understood. So see, there are multiple different types of POPs, multiple different types of insecticides, multiple different types of herbicides, weedicides, fungicides, etc. Now, many of them do consist of POPs. So accordingly, depending upon the type of POPs, they are classified into different groups. And that grouping is carried out purely in order to control those chemicals. Because once you list all of them out, you can categorize them based upon their chemical composition and chemical compounds. So you need to ban them, you need to stop the circulation of them. So that is why, in order to have or implement a better um, regulation of those particular materials, all those chemicals which have been listed in Annex 1 or Annex 2, they are the ones which need to be completely phased out. Annex 3 are those chemical compounds, and these chemical compositions, let's say you manufacture a newer chemical for a pharmaceutical industry. Now there also, let's suppose there's a new chemical composition, so that chemical composition needs to be understood, and even if there is a discharge of POP there, that will be put under Annex 3. So like that, the classification is done for the better implementation of the phasing out. Is that understood now? Okay. So now we come to the Rotterdam Convention. Rotterdam is very similar to that of the Basel Convention. And here prior informed consent procedure is also followed for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in the international trade. It is administered by FAO and UNEP, important for prelims. Now, it consists of list of chemical pesticides and industrial chemicals which have been banned or severely restricted. So, that are banned or severely restricted, all those chemical pesticides and all the various different chemicals which have been used for coloring agents, etc., which from one area or the other, from one convention or the other, which have been completely banned. So, their movement, their production, etc., is tracked by the Rotterdam Convention. Any concern related to pesticides and industrial chemicals promotes their inclusion into the Annex 3. Okay, so here prior informed consent is required. A decision guidance document contains the information for all those chemicals for the various countries to take a look into, so as to understand if they are importing a particular chemical, whether that consists of those banned elements or not, whether it is fit to be used or not. So that detail is provided them. Now, with respect to the chemicals included, the member countries can either allow its import, disallow its import, or allow its import with certain conditions. The country that imports the chemicals has to formulate decisions that are trade neutral, in the sense that if, let's suppose, there is a chemical, let's suppose ABC. Now, if as a country, India, India decides to import this chemical, let's suppose, because of certain exigencies, certain requirements. Now, then India cannot have a kind of a preference that if I will import this chemical only from Russia. If you have taken a decision to import this chemical, hazardous chemical, then after that, you have to be trade neutral. You have to be open to it. That any country which follows the norms of the trade, that which is ready to offer you in the favorable conditions and the favorable terms, you have to get it from them. You cannot show biases in that case. Okay. Now we come over to the portion of climate change. This is something which is very important for your mains exam. For the mains exam, here you get questions about the basics of climate change. Okay. Impacts of climate change. Sea level rise. Okay. These are few of the areas where you can always expect a mains question or even an interview question to be asked from. So here we study about climate change, but first of all, is climate change a new phenomenon? Is it something which has been happening on the planet for the first time? The answer is, what do you think? Is it happening for the first time? No. Right? So the planet goes through multiple different phases of heating and cooling. And it is a kind of a continuous process. It is not something which is an aberration, right? So the planet enters into that phase of cooling and heating continuously, due to which we are witness to various different ice age phenomena as well. Now, then why is it that so much amount of hue and cry and so much amount of global concern is created due to climate change? That is because the rate at which the climate is changing. So, not a new phenomena at all. But the rate at which the climate is changing, of climate change, is bringing irreversible changes. Changes in the global environment. Okay, so it is that particular rate of sudden climate change which is significantly concerning and discerning. So when we talk about global warming, That is the phenomena of increasing average air temperature near the surface of the earth over the past 1 or 2 centuries. And that has been happening. Why? Because of increased amount of emission of greenhouse gases ever since the period of the industrial revolution. The amount of greenhouse gases which have been emitted into the atmosphere has been significantly exponential. So that is bringing about certain irreversible changes. Okay. Now here we also talk about the aspect of greenhouse effect. Any of us having any doubt about greenhouse effect? What is greenhouse effect? No? Okay. So we understand greenhouse effect. Good. So very briefly, let me tell you about it. So greenhouse effect is about when you have the planet surrounded by the various different gases and the atmosphere as well. Let's suppose, this represents the atmosphere. Now, when the solar insolation comes in, that solar insolation is received in the form of short wave radiation. And then that heats up the surface of the planet. Now, surface of the planet also, when it starts heating up, it starts emitting that radiation in the form of long waves. And those long waves, in the presence of the greenhouse gases, what are the greenhouse gases? You have, for example, CO2, you have, for example, nitrous oxide, you have water vapor, carbon monoxide, even aerosols, that is, for example, black carbon that we discussed. All of these, they end up forming a kind of a blanket, and they will limit that heat, or they will encapsulate that heat, send it back to the surface, causing maintenance of temperature. And in case where you have excessive amount of these greenhouse gases, that leads to prolonged heating as well. So that is what is greenhouse effect. So under normal conditions, it is beneficial. Under normal conditions, it is beneficial. Why? Because it helps maintain the temperature of the planet. Helps maintain the temperature of the planet. Okay. And when you have excess greenhouse gases, what will it lead to? Increased retention of heat, and that can cause global warming. Now, anyways, the planet as of now is in a warming phase. Ever since the last ice age, the planet has entered into a kind of a warming phase where the temperature is slowly and steadily and continuously rising up. But then there are various different events and incidents which can either accelerate the rate of heating or can decelerate the rate of heating. For example, let's suppose if in the air we have a kind of, let's suppose, significant amount of cloud cover, white cloud, right? Clouds generally are white from top. So the solar rays will be reflected by that white cloud. So this will provide some amount of cooling on the surface, isn't it? Rather than that, let's suppose if you have, when we talk about the region of the Arctic, you have deposits of, or let's talk about the region of the Himalayas, something that we will more closely associate with. Now, in the region of the Himalayas, you have the deposits of black carbon, which has happened because of the pollution in the northern part of India. Significant amount of black carbon has moved over to the region of Himalayas and deposited itself. Now, those black carbons, when they are, and these are very small particles, they will basically dull the coloration of the ice, And once it becomes darker, the ice starts becoming darker, it starts absorbing greater amount of heat. Rather than reflecting larger amount, it will start absorbing greater amount of heat, and that will lead to an accelerated rise of temperature. So there are certain factors which would lead to an accelerated rise of temperature. There are certain factors which would provide some amount of cooling. That is what is referred to as radiative forcing. Radiative forcing are those various factors which can either increase or reduce the rate of heating and cooling. So here, when we take a look at the aspect of, so this is basically your greenhouse effect. So greenhouse and the definition of it. So Earth's energy budget is further complicated by the greenhouse effect, and the greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, absorb some of the infrared radiation produced by the Earth's surface. Now, here, as we were talking about the aspect of radiative forcing, so certain factors such as, let's say, deposition of black carbon, etc., they can either accelerate the rate of heating or they can decelerate the rate of heating and provide cooling. So that is what is classified into positive forcing or negative forcing. You have positive forcing. What are those positive forcings? So those factors which accelerate the rate of heating. Then you also have negative forcing. That is those factors which provide a significant cooling. Okay, that is the classification. So what are the factors which can provide cooling? For example, as I told you, coverage of or the presence of significant cloud cover, that will reduce or that will improve the amount of reflection, so lesser amount of heating of the surface. For example, let's suppose when you have sulfur dioxide. Now, sulfur dioxide, when it goes higher up into the atmosphere, that sulfur dioxide combines with the vapor molecules, water vapor molecules, and that forms very microscopic whitish aerosols. Now, those aerosols, they start reflecting the amount of sunlight received, right? So, when we talk about SO2 based aerosols, they reflect the solar rays, reflect the solar rays, and that provides cooling. And that is what we regard as negative forcing. And this sulfur dioxide in large quantums is released whenever you have a kind of a volcanic eruption. You have large amount of release of this sulfur dioxide that gets released in very large quantities. So that is where you have the SO2 based aerosols emitted and created whenever you have a volcanic eruption. That is why when scientists and ecologists and environmentalists, they talk about the artificial methodologies of cooling the planet, they always talk about the SO2 based cooling which can be carried out, the sulfur dioxide based cooling which can be carried out. So here, if you take a look at it, this is a report presented by the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And IPCC, basically, when it published the report, it talked about the impact of the various different agents. For example, greenhouse gases, They will always provide heating. So this is positive forcing. So all this is positive forcing. Okay. This is positive forcing, which causes warming. This is what we refer to as negative forcing, which provides significant amount of cooling. So for example, here you will observe that certain aerosols, right? So black carbon, that provides heating. Whereas when we talk about SO2 based aerosols, they provide cooling. Then cloud cover. Cloud cover also ends up providing cooling because why? They start reflecting the materials from the top of the surface itself. Then change in albedo because of the reflectiveness of the Earth's surface. So Earth's surface also reflects almost 20 to 25% of the solar rays which fall upon it. That is why from space, the Earth appears like a blue planet because it will reflect that. So that is again basically going to create a cooling activity. Okay. So these are your major greenhouse gases. The major greenhouse gases in terms of what can trap the amount of heat. Now, these are not the only greenhouse gases, by the way. These are just the major greenhouse gases. So you have methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor, nitrous oxide, etc. They provide or they trap the heat. When we talk about water vapor, it is one of the most potent of the greenhouse gases because they end up trapping heat and retaining heat for a significant portion. Now, once they retain heat, they will warm the region. So they warm the surface. There is a greater evaporation from the surface as well, isn't it? So here you will observe that wherever there is a significant amount of moisture or water vapor present, there is a substantial amount of evaporation caused in that region as well, greater amount of heating caused. So it is a kind of a feedback loop mechanism. That is, water vapor increases the heat retained. Now, if there is an increase in the amount of heat retained, that is when you will observe greater evaporation from the surface. Evaporation from the surface. Now, if you have a greater rate of evaporation from the surface, that would mean what? More vapor in a way. Water vapor. And that will fulfill the kind of a cycle. So that is why whenever moisture is very high, it kicks on a kind of a feedback loop mechanism where it continues to heat the particular region for a longer run in general. Then carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide not necessarily would be released only by anthropogenic factors. Carbon dioxide is also released by natural factors and natural causes. For example, whenever you carry out any kind of decomposition or natural decay of organic matter, respiration as well, when we breathe in, breathe out, that also will release carbon dioxide. Whenever you have a volcanic eruption, that releases carbon dioxide in humongous quantity. For example, as I would already have given the example of volcanic eruptions in Krakatoa, that is the western part of Indonesia, that the Krakatoa eruption which happened, now that eruption was something which happened, or the volcano erupted way back in 1880s. The eruption has been so massive and the eruption was so very explosive. It released so much amount of carbon dioxide that it is estimated that it would take almost to around 200 years for all of that carbon dioxide to be dissipated into the atmosphere. So that is why even the natural processes, including right outgassing from volcanoes, combustion and natural decay, they would release carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is naturally absorbed as well. And these regions where the carbon dioxide is absorbed, they are referred to as the natural sinks of carbon dioxide. For example, CO2 is taken by plants. And the plants will take in CO2 for what? For the photosynthetic process. So that is what is also sometimes referred to as the green carbon. I'll give you the definition of it later on as well. Then CO2 absorbed by the oceanic surface. Okay. Now, from the air-water interchange and interface, there is a significant amount of absorption of CO2 which happens naturally. Almost 25% of the global CO2 is absorbed directly by the ocean interface. And that, in a way, provides the carbon dioxide into the ocean. That is used by the chemotrophs in many of the cases. That is also used by the phytoplanktons. And once that CO2 proportion starts going higher up, that is when we encounter the problem of ocean acidification, which we will study as well. But then this CO2 which is absorbed by the oceans directly, this is also what is classified as the blue carbon. So these are what are referred to as the sinks. Okay, sinks which remove carbon from the atmosphere. Then you have methane. Now, methane or CH4, it is the second most important greenhouse gas in terms of its potency. Per molecule, ability of methane to trap heat is much larger than CO2. But then, methane does not persist or exist in the atmosphere for a very long period of time. So if you consider one molecule of CO2, let's suppose, and if you consider one molecule of, let's say, methane, this will trap greater amount of heat. But then the problem is, or not the problem, but the good thing in that matter is that this methane molecule dissipates into the atmosphere very quickly by forming hydroxide ions. So the atmosphere in itself forms a natural sink for methane, gets dissipated very quickly. Dissipated much quicker as compared to CO2. Okay, it will always end up interacting with the various different water vapor molecules which are present, and then ends up forming hydroxyl ions. So CH4 is more potent than CO2 because of the radiative forcing, that is, it traps greater amount of heat. So it is responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperature since the industrial revolution, and that is quite significant. That is not a small quantity. However, that methane exists in far lower concentration as compared to CO2 in the atmosphere. And here, that is why the methane concentration is something which is measured in parts per billion, whereas CO2 concentrations are measured in parts per million, which tells you the abundance of CO2. Now, CH4 also has shorter residence time in the atmosphere. This fact, which I have repeated multiple times, is important for your prelims. Even this particular portion is relevant for your prelims. Okay. Now, the methane is emitted from both natural sources as well as anthropogenic sources. What can be the natural sources? So again, decomposition, whenever it is carried out, methane is released. Whenever you observe any kind of degradation, biodecomposition, etc., methane will be produced. Agricultural activities, methane will be produced. Then For example, in the region of the wetlands, if the water evaporates, all that methane is evaporated, or the methane is supplied. So that is where the various different wetlands, methane oxidizing bacteria, volcanoes, they will continue to provide the atmosphere with methane. Even when we talk about the animals, the gases that they release, that also is very rich in methane. The cow dung, for example, is a rich source of methane emission. Now, that is when you go for, or whenever you have the animals or the various organisms, when they go for the digestive process, that also produces methane. Whenever you carry out any kind of animal slaughter, from the smallest to the largest, that releases a lot of methane. So agricultural industry is one of the agricultural sector rather is one of the large sources of emitters of methane. Okay, that is why precision farming is advised, that when you are cutting a particular, or when you cut a tree, that releases carbon dioxide also, methane also. So when you are harvesting a crop, if you do it in an unscientific manner, it will end up causing a lot of methane pollution. Okay. Now, primary natural sink for methane is the atmosphere itself, as methane reacts readily with the hydroxyl radical within the troposphere to form CO2 and water vapor. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about methane, so there we talk about another area which has become a source of concern for the past few years, and that is the peatlands. Are we aware of the term peat? Are we aware of the classification of coal into anthracite, bituminous, lignite, and peat? I hope that much we are aware about. So, peat is the worst form of coal in terms of carbon content, and is where the coal has not completely converted into, or where the wood has not completely converted into coal. That is peat. Now, what do we mean by peatlands? So, here you have certain areas across the planet where you have significant amount of vegetation vegetation in the form of dead trees, etc., which is submerged under water, submerged under significant amount of water. Okay, and here you have the various dead trees, dead vegetation, submerged vegetation as well. In certain cases, not everything will be dead, some submerged vegetation as well, but a lot of these dead trees are present. Let dead vegetation which has been swamped over by water for a very long duration for the planet's history. Now this has got a lot of methane which is trapped. Now with climate change, these peatlands are experiencing evaporation. Regions of submerged vegetation, largely in marshy areas, largely in marshy regions. Okay, so regions of submerged vegetation, and this vegetation can be dead and living. Now, due to global warming, these peatlands are experiencing an evaporation of water at a large scale. And also due to encroachment, construction activities, etc., that water is being removed. So, if you remove that water, there is a significant amount of methane which is trapped in that water. So, once these peatlands would be lost, all that methane which is trapped would be supplied to the atmosphere again. And that would increase the rate of heating, because methane is a potent greenhouse gas. So it would always increase the rate of heating. That is why there was a global convention to conserve these peatlands. And that convention for conservation of peatlands conservation and protection of peatlands. That is what we refer to as, what was arrived at as Brazzaville Convention. Where is Brazzaville situated? All the geniuses who are sitting there, where is Brazzaville situated? In which part of the world? Tell me the continent at least before you start typing on Google. Okay, fair enough. So take your own time. No, it is in Africa. Yes, correct in the Preet. Okay. Tell me the country where it is situated. Find out the country. At least do this on your own. So that is the Brazzaville Convention. Now, even when we carry out, let's say, traditional farming of rice, for example, when you cultivate rice, now the traditional method of cultivation of rice is done how? No, it is not in South America. Yes, it is in Congo. Very good. So Brazzaville is situated in Congo. Good. Sri Devi and Indrapreet. So even when you carry out the traditional cultivation of, let's say, rice, how do you do it? One of the traditional methods of rice farming is by inundation of the field, flooding of the farmlands. So when you flood the farmlands, now there also the saplings are planted at that point of time. So that also produces methane. So any organic processes overall, they would produce methane. Now, once that water is lost or evaporated from those farmlands, that would also end up releasing significant amount of methane into the atmosphere. Okay. Now, these are the global sources of methane. Just to give you an idea. So here you would observe that these are your natural sources. Hashed areas are your natural sources. These are your natural sources for the release of methane. Okay. So here, for example, wetlands, the change in water level, whenever it happens, it releases a lot of methane. Other than that, significant proportion is released by the burning of the fossil fuels, rice cultivation, enteric formation and production of manure. Enteric fermentation is basically the digestive process that you observe in the milch cattle, the cattle generally, right? So they will also produce a lot of methane. Then waste which we generate, that also ends up generating a lot of methane. Overall, this is something that you need to know, not the exact quantums of them, but the sources of this methane you need to know for your prelims examination. Sources are important for prelims. Okay. Now, we have a global methane tracker which is established by the International Energy Agency. And that global methane tracker found that the global energy industry was responsible for 135 million tons of methane released into the atmosphere in 2022, which is only slightly below the pre-pandemic levels. And the energy sector accounts for 40% of the total methane emissions, second only to agriculture. So agriculture is one of the chief sectors for methane emission, be it in the region or be it by animal husbandry, be it by growing crops, anywhere, agriculture is one of the chief areas for methane production. Okay. Now, this is again important for your prelims. Searched in Google. It's okay as long as you are aware of where that region lies and the purpose is solved, that is okay. Okay. So there are few of the other components, few of the other gases which contribute to global warming or greenhouse gases. That is the surface ozone, nitrous oxide. You have the halons and the fluorinated gases, and also aerosols. What are aerosols? So aerosols, they are very small microscopic sized particles which are largely liquid or in a liquid proportion. That is something which is so light that it is able to suspend itself into the atmosphere. Black carbon is the only aerosol, or one of the only few aerosols which can exist in a solid state. Okay, so when we talk about aerosols, they are extremely small solid or liquid particle droplets suspended into the atmosphere. And it can be placed in the atmosphere primarily by large dust storms, volcanic eruptions, or the soot. Soot is basically what is black carbon is also referred to as soot. So when you have fire, whenever you burn something, that black carbon is emitted. Now, liquid aerosols in the atmosphere primarily consist of water droplets in which active chemical species may be found. So, out of these aerosols, SO2 based aerosols provide cooling, whereas black carbon is one of those aerosols which provides heating. Okay, right? So that is the aspect of aerosols. Then we come to the portion of global dimming, which we'll take a look at it after the, yes, we'll take a break, don't worry. So after the snacks break, so you have a half an hour break in front of you. So we take a half an hour break and we come back at 5:40, and then we'll continue the final session for climate change. Okay.